voice this morning. First, let me start by asking you, because key issue, how do we continue to fund SHS whilst also providing adequate funding for basic education, at the same time improving infrastructure and perhaps implementing their own policy. That's is a stress-free, fee-free stress policy. How would they do all that? And yesterday they announced some measures. I'm sure you listened attentively. Satisfied?
How do we fund all those? First of all, we need to increase the allocation of the national budget for education. The share of education of the national budget will have to be increased. In the past 7 years, we had an average of 19% being allocated to education. And the spending is just around, 20%. And by looking at the nature of our education system, it is important to appreciate that even though there are minimum funding benchmarks sanctioned by UNESCO, of which we are a member of, that dictates that at least 20% of our budget goes into education. In our case, 20% will never be enough, and that we should target higher thresholds.
The UNESCO threshold will not be enough?
No, UNESCO threshold will not be enough for Ghana.
Why?
We should target higher thresholds. Now, let me quickly say that earlier I said that 20% had been allocated. It is not allocated. It actually has been spent. About 19% has been spent. The allocation normally is between 15% and 17%. But in terms of expenditure, we always do 3 to 4 percentage points above allocation. So expenditure is just around the 20%. The reason why we cannot be doing 20% expenditure, 19.8% expenditure on education, and implement all these policies is because Ghana has a peculiar situation. Ghana is the only country in the world which has a free secondary education, which is boarding. No country in this world has a free boarding secondary education policy. No country.
Only us.
That's a day. So once you do it boarding, it means that the cost of the secondary education is 3 times higher than the international average. So if other countries are doing 20% of their budget education by way of expenditure, you also cannot do that. You need more. And that is why I'm saying that, yes, we can fund all that you mentioned, but it will require us committing up to about 23-24% of public expenditure for education. If you remember, when President Akufo-Addo went to the UN summit, the Transformation Education Summit in the UK in 2022, he declared that Ghana was going to spend 23% of its budget on education. And that was the benchmark he set for Ghana when he was asked to lead as an ambassador to whip other African countries in line. Unfortunately, that year, we had only about 15% being allocated to education. So we need more than 20%, higher than the threshold for the world, because we have the most expensive secondary education system in the world.
Up to 23%. So you're saying that the elephant in the room is the boarding aspect that we decided to fund?
Yes.
So
the boarding aspect, which is a cultural aspect of our secondary education system. That makes our system very expensive, and so we require more money from the national budget than other countries would require, proportionally.
Then, does the fact that the administration has now added paying the fees or first years in tertiary institutions, does it complicate the matter?
Yes, it increases the burden. I'll come to the complication. It increases the burden, the financial burden on the goods and services budget. The free senior, so the education sector budget has 3 components: capital expenditure for building infrastructure, and then we have the compensation for paying salaries, and then goods and services. Compensation takes 70% of the budget. that comes to education. Goods and services take 20%, and then capital expenditure takes average 10%, which is inadequate. Now, you realize that if you take the 20% that goes to goods and services as a whole, majority of that money goes to secondary education. Last year, about 6 billion that went into goods and services, about 3 billion would have gone to secondary education. The remaining 3 billion is not money that can be spent at the tertiary level because they are IGF retention, IGF being raised by tertiary institutions, which they are supposed to keep there. So it doesn't even come to the ministry. So if you look critically at the pre-tertiary budget, free senior high school alone, the pre-tertiary goods and services budget, free senior high school alone will take about 95%. Now that we have started free tertiary, it means that we have increased.
Wow. We'll get Mr. Kofi Asare back on the line, continue the conversation. And if you listen to him carefully, he's saying that UNESCO has a threshold that you should spend at least up to 20% of your budget on education. But because we have decided to implement a senior high school policy that absorbs the cost of boarding, we have to do 23 to 24%. You are essentially talking about the goods and services budget.
Yeah, so the free tertiary will add about 500 million Ghana cedis pressure annually to this goods and services budget. So that we are going to need 500 million more to fund goods and services. And if I say goods and services, I'm talking about free basic, free secondary, free tertiary. Free basic is very tiny, 145 for capitation grants, and then, feeding grants to special schools, and then some little items like DEC subsidies. It's very tiny. That's about 4%. All the rest will go to tertiary and then secondary. So yes, it will be extra financial burden on the government, but depending on how that policy is fashioned, there will be not just a relief, but then there will be an enhanced case of efficiency, in the sense that if the government decides to give a maximum of 3,000 to every tertiary student in the public space, from colleges to universities, tertiary universities, then the government will not be targeting the free tertiary. In that case, it will not be spending efficient. In that case, we'll be repeating the same mistake we did on a free senior high school at the tertiary level. But if the government decides to target the free tertiary and ask that if you need support by way of waiver of your admission fee to enable you to access tertiary, come and write your name for us to do a quick means testing. That means testing is already being done by the Student Loan Trust Fund for student loan applicants. The system already exists, which can take just 24 hours. If we do that, then in that case, we might be spending lesser, about half that amount. And we would be providing free tertiary for those who need it to access tertiary education. At the same time, we would have saved about half of that money and use that half of that money we are saving to enhance the quality and the quantum of the student loan scheme, so that in years 2, year 3, and year 4, after they are benefited from the free tertiary in year 1, there will be an enhanced student loan package to take care of them throughout the school. Let's say about 5,000 cedis a year instead of the current average of 2,000 cedis a year. So it depends on how the government decides to go ahead the free tertiary. For now, all we know is that it's 500 million budgeted. We don't know whether the 500 million is for the batch that entered in January, or it's for both the batch that entered in January and then the September batch that will enter. If it's for both, then it means that it's targeting it. If it's for only one batch, it means that it's not being targeted. But for now, we don't have the details because we are yet to see the budget statement itself. What we have is the speech.
I know you're currently doing some work on, you're part of the group that are doing some work on reviewing educational structure, and I'm sure one of the areas that will be touched is free senior high school, and we'll essentially get there. But before that, key thing for government was to find money to continue to fund it in its current shape. They are going to get fund. What do you think?
You're talking about free senior high school?
Yes, free senior high school.
Well, free senior high school has been funded from ABFA, that's oil revenues, education share of oil revenues. Last year, about 100% of Free Senior High School was funded from the oil revenues. And so we have raised concern. And as much as all the second receipts from oil revenue, all is spent on only Free Senior High School. And for the fact that that funding source is one of the most reliable in the sector, we have raised concerns about spreading, about allocating the most reliable funding stream to just one policy. But in the past 3-4 years, a trend has emerged where we've seen an average of 9% annual dip in oil output, consistent for about 4-5 years, which means that the revenue accruing from ABFE, and for that matter, education share of ABFE has continued to decline. That is why last year, ABFA wasn't enough to finance Free Senior High School, ABFA alone. So the issue now is that it is risky to over-rely on ABFA alone to finance Free Senior High School. And so government should find a supplementary source of funding to ensure that funding sustainability is achieved on the policy. So looking at Get Fund will obviously be one of the best ways out, because Get Fund is, if you like, once uncapped, Get Fund will be the most trustworthy source of funding, even more than ABSA, because Get Fund is predictable once uncapped. So I think that will be, in the short term, the wisest decision to make in respect of sustaining the financing of Free Senior High School.
You're saying in the short term?
In the short term, because in the long term, we must target that policy. In the long term, we must target the Free Senior High School policy. We must find a way as a country in the long term of fashioning out a means testing mechanism which can enable us identify those who are poor and cannot pay, and then give them even more support that we are giving to them, including, for instance, paying the cost of their prospectus, which denies them access anyway, even though feeding is free and accommodation is free. So in the long term, as a country, we must have a plan. But in the short to medium term, a policy that was started on the wrong foot and made wholesale free is difficult for you to, in the short term or in the medium term, and take radical changes to it. It is very difficult, more so when it has been sufficiently politicized and review has been established as meaning council. It is very, very, very difficult to undertake such changes and have the support of the citizenry. But in the long term, we must look beyond the free and look at how we can still support the poorest of the poor who need more support than they are currently benefiting from the policy. And those that can conveniently pay, also, giving lesser support. That is how you manage a social intervention policy. You target it. But for now, I think that the government intends to maintain the Free Senior High School in its current shape.
The criticism from the
looking at its initial budget.
The criticism from the MPP is that you're just talking about the fact that even CAPES, in terms of the budget to the education sector, is around 10%. They feel that you're squeezing in more of CAPES if you're taking money from Get Fund, which is one of the funds from which we fund CAPES in the education sector. Do you agree with them?
Of course. But that is an opportunity cost. You see, we keep saying every day that the issue about financing Free Senior High School is never about whether a government can finance it or not. It is never so. The government can do everything apart from turning the money into a woman. But the issue about financing Free Senior High School is always about Free Senior High School that is goods and services, crowding out investment in CAPEX and investment for basic education. That is always the issue. It has never been that can Ghana government finances or not. So when I hear people say that we will fund it, it is not about you can't fund it. It's about the opportunity cost of it financing on crowding out investment in CAPEX and basic education share of goods and services. That is the reality. So yes, it's true. Once ABSA is not enough, once you are moving on to get funds to get about 1 billion, support free financing, it means that you are spending 1 billion less in building schools. That's what it means. Last year, we spent a significant portion of get funds in procuring tablets. In the past year, when we are spending over 2 billion cedis in procuring tablets for senior high schools, which is a great idea because textbooks are supposed to be accessed on a tablet, and it is part of the digital learning, digital learning journey, the digital learning enterprise. It's a good idea, but the funding came from GETS. That is not a building, right? It's not a physical infrastructure, but the funding came from GETS funds, meaning that 2 billion less of GETS funds would have been deprived capex. So anytime, and that is a free financial expenditure, so anytime we incur high costs at free senior high school, always bear in mind that the impact is that it reduces the capex budget because the compensation budget is non-discretionary. So it will always reduce the other discretionary budget, which is the capex budget. And then also it will affect the expenditure on goods and services for basic education, and then also basic education share of capex. So it is true, but that is what we have actually bargained for. And until we realize it and do the changes that we need to do, we'll continue to wallow in that circle.
Now, interesting, in fact, we'll come to perhaps what you're doing with the forum, but first, I want to find out from you about the basic education. And I've heard you complain consistently about the fact that basic education was not getting enough attention. All the attention was going to senior high school education. This government is increasing capitation grant from 84 million to 145.5 million. And I'm guessing that goes to basic education. Adequate?
Adequate. As an allocation. Adequate. Capitation grant was increased by the previous government to 16 cedis per unit per head.
Okay.
After maintaining it at 10 cedis for about 7 years. So it was increased just last year. So I say adequate in terms of the trajectory. It was 84 last year. Adequate. But let me quickly say that the problem of capitation granting is not just the budget. The budget is 30% of the problem. 70% of the problem is the releases. Even when 84 is about the budget, releases becomes an issue. Between 2017 and 2022, only 59% of the capitation grants was ever released.
59%?
59. Between 2017 up to 2023 academic year, only 59% of the grant was ever released. So the issue is about under-budgeting, yes, but it is more about budget credibility. That is releasing under-budgeted lines. And so what I would say is that for now we are analyzing the budget. We are not analyzing the budget execution. That is the work we are going to do for the whole of the year. Because the budget is a policy. The policy is implemented. So we are going to monitor policy implementation from the policy conception. Now the budget has been agreed. So the work is to ensure that the 145 doesn't become a real. That for me is the big element in the room. But the 145 gives us hope that for the first time we are seeing capitation grants fully budgeted, and even some arrears added to the budget. That is a sign of good hope for basic education.
So for you, what this government needs to do is actually ensure that it does not only budget, but release the amounts in time.
In real time. Okay. In real time. The grant must arrive at the beginning of the academic year, not after the academic year, when it's not needed. But the reality is that if the grant delay gets to the school at the wrong time, teachers are unable to finance, for example, examination. And then they write examination on the blackboard. They are unable to undertake minor infrastructure repairs or maintenance. And then students will be sitting on the floor when they could have bought a pack of nails and got to the carpenter to fix some decks. So how do you achieve after the horses have already built on the table? So it is important for not just the grant to be released, but to release timely at the right
What about school feeding? And I'm sure you've seen the allocation. What do you think the biggest problem is? Because now it's been increased to 1.788 billion. Yet every time there's this consistency of caterers always demonstrating.
We've seen the school feeding increase from 0.96 2 years ago to 1.2. It's now 2 cities. The budget, it has increased by 30%. 2 cities. Allocation has increased from 1.1 to 1.4 million. That's also significant, 30% increase. We were calling for the matching of the free senior high school budget on lunch with the school feeding budget, which is 3 cities. But we couldn't get 3 cities for school feeding. We got this amount. I think that it is a good start. But I think the mid-year budget will have to make amends and augment that particular amount. You see, the issue with the school feeding program is that if it doesn't happen well, it ends up not becoming nutritious. It doesn't impact positively on retention as it is meant to be. The challenge with the school feeding program goes beyond increasing the budget. We commend the government for increasing the budget. But the challenge goes beyond increasing the budget. The program requires serious management reform. The program in its centralized nature can never serve its purpose. Across the world, in Africa, in South America, SFPs, and I mean school feeding programs, have only been sustained by local governments. Centralized management has never sustained any school feeding program. So what we need to do is to fully decentralize the school feeding program, ship it to the district assemblies. Central government financing, yes, that's fine, because districts do not have the capacity across board. But in the long term, we work towards a situation where district assemblies take financial ownership as well, while government was leveraged by supporting districts with lower income generating capacity with centralized government funding. What should happen is that the district assemblies should control procurement. Government agencies, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Gender, Food and Drugs, or other agencies will undertake quality assurance and regulation of quality and standards. That is how it has worked in every country, and it cannot be different for Ghana. The second is that we must depoliticize the program. The program remains a reward for party and apparatus, especially women organizers. That is not how a program is developed. You can't develop or grow a program if it is a political reward mechanism, because it blurs accountability. Because people will have a sense of entitlement once they are contracted. Instead of being accountable to the school and to the children they are feeding, they will be accountable to their political masters. So we must depoliticize the school feeding program and run it as a professional program. These reforms must happen to enable the increment in budget to the Ghana school feeding program become meaningful and manifest in quality food in the classroom.
And until those reforms happen, you are expecting that in a mid-year budget review, government increases the allocation to a child per day from 2 cities to 3 cities.
Yeah, I think we need to get to 3 cities. You see, if we don't allocate adequately, and we CSOs are demanding quality, then it becomes a bit incongruous. Then our work becomes a bit out of context. That you are aware that we are being given only 2 cities. Now you are demanding a quality equivalent of 3 cities. So we fight for relevant allocations based on which we will fight for commensurate quality. So it's a technical situation. And as I'm saying, there's a standard at the senior high school level. The average senior high school is about 2,000 students or 3,000 students. If a senior high school is giving 3 cities to buy lunch for students, and a day school is a basic school is only 500 averagely, how come we are giving them 2 cities? Because they don't enjoy economy of scale. Economy of scale is at the benefit of the senior high school that are 3,000 students. So either way, it makes sense to match basic school feeding program costs to the lunch at the senior high school level. Then we are consistent. And in the long term, we must benchmark all this against inflation. All we have done under LEAP, because the IMF demanded we should do for Ghana school feeding program, we should do for capitation grants. We must benchmark all these interventions by having an indexation mechanism, okay, that annually increases the amount in line with the inflationary rate. This is not rocket science. You understand? And that once you turn a blind eye to that, you are deliberately funding declining quality, which is the fact, because quality is always produced by adequate investment. So we must index the capitation grant and the school feeding program against inflation. So that every time inflation goes up annually, there will be an automatic adjustment mechanism for the per unit.
Great. Two things before I let you go. One is the Free Sanitary Pad Initiative. This government is funding it. What do you think? You do some work at the basic level, at the senior high school level. Is it a serious requirement for girls at that level?
In some communities, the lack of sanitary towels has the ability of keeping girls out of school for up to 8 days. For up to 8 days every month.
8 days?
Yes, for up to 8 days every month. Yes. And in Ghana, it has the ability of keeping girls out of school for a whole week. And so it is a big issue. That is why laws have been passed in many countries to remove taxes and sanitary towels. It's because of its impact on enrollment. On retention. You understand? And where poverty is endemic, it becomes even more impactful. Some time ago, the government of Ghana introduced a free sanitary pads under a World Bank project, I think in 2012, 2013. And then it wasn't sustained. I think the free sanitary towels to students shouldn't be an intervention. It should be a policy. It should mainstream as part of free basic education. You see, we have called for the development of a free basic education policy. We don't have one after 1980. So that what goes into free basic education is documented and enacted. So that doesn't become the discretion of government A to do this or do that because they see it as an intervention instead of a policy. So if you have that policy, you have free sanitary towels for girls integrated into the things that the child should receive as part of free basic education. And same for free secondary education. That's for free secondary education, that's a policy. But we must mainstream all these interventions into the policy so that they don't become handouts or, negotiables, but they become integral parts of free secondary education and free basic education policy. So thumbs up, the sanitary towels or pads are key. Countries like Kenya led the way years ago. We've seen a significant impact on girls' education, on girls' retention, especially on hygiene, and also in boosting the confidence of girls by retaining them in school for the days that they normally wouldn't be there. So that's a great idea. We want to see an implementation mechanism that assures us of effectiveness and efficiency in procurement, in distribution, and then in the use of the sanitary pads. That is what we need to see. Once we're able to get that right, that's a good policy that must come to stay.
Great. Then let me conclude with you on this note. On the controversial matter of the teacher nursing trainee allowances. In fact, this government, Mahama #1 tried a reform, and that essentially led to a backlash from the people who were there, and even people who had left the training and were already working. They were not happy. They thought that it was a very bad idea. So coming back, they've decided that no problem. If that's what you want, we would allocate money for it. I guess I know your view, but what do you think of this change in direction from them?
Well, when the Mahama administration, the Mahama 1 administration cancelled the allowance, we applauded the government because we have been advocating, civil society organizations have been advocating for about 9 years or 10 years. You see, you asked the question initially that how do you get money to fund all these policies? That was the first question. One of the ways is to be spending efficient. And once you are spending efficient, you are able to, appropriate your limited resources according to the best priorities. I don't think putting 200 million in the teachers allowance payment is one of our best priorities. Okay, yes. It is a need for many, but it's not one of our top priorities. Let me give you an example. Teachers are tertiary students. When it was cancelled, they were not tertiary students. Now they are tertiary students. Every teacher in the college is doing a B.Ed program. They are tertiary students. So Accra College of Education, which is near my office, is a tertiary institution. Okay. And the students there are entitled to every benefit that a public tertiary student must benefit. That's how it should be. Why is it that a student attends Accra College of Education to read B.Ed basic education, get license, and come to teach in a public basic school? They will pay the same salary as the same student who went to University of Ghana, just a kilometer away or so, to read the same program. And then the other student also goes to the same public school and is paid the same money. But you are telling the student that attended the University of Ghana to go for a student loan. But for the same program, you're asking the one at Accra Training College, Accra College of Education, to go for a free allowance. How does that feel? You understand? And to add insult to injury, the student at Accra College of Education is having accommodation. You give them hostel. But the one at Legon is sleeping, they are sleeping in their own private hotels. They will all come and teach in the same school and be paid the same salary by the government. So apart from the inequality this policy is perpetuating, it is spending inefficient. We believe that in a country where many students do not have access to exercise books, if you go to Nanumba North, if you go to Tatale, go to Tanguli, Zabzugu, you go to Nabdam, go to Talensi, you enter a class, and up to 3 out of 10 do not have access to exercise book to write in. And if you have 200 million, it's the best way to spend it to feed teachers, buy food for teachers who are tertiary students, or you are then other key, priorities. So for me, it is a political issue. The only reason why the policy is there is because of the politics. Because when the government cancelled it, the opposition used it against them, and the students also ganged up, and so politically convened. But the reality is that we can't continue to spend money on teacher training allowance when we have a student loan scheme the government has promised to enhance. The government has promised in its manifesto to enhance the student loan scheme into what it calls a student loan plus. So what will be the reason for enhancing it? You are enhancing it for all tertiary students, so that after enjoying their first year free tertiary education, they can move on to that loan scheme, which is enhanced and is disbursed much earlier, so that they can live on it for the 3 years. So why are you recommending this beautiful meal to students who are attending universities? And you are telling other students in the colleges that after this meal is good, but we won't allow you to eat it. We'll give you a different meal. So that's the issue with the teacher allowance. I believe that we, at a point, the two political parties should come to a convergence and agree that such policies will continue to hurt us if we continue to politicize their existence. Until we depart from this, it will continue to be an albatross around our neck. But Edward's position is that once you have an enhanced student loan scheme for all tertiary students, every public tertiary institution must migrate onto the student loan scheme. And government money should go into strengthening the quality and responsiveness of the student loan scheme. Once you do that, then you are creating a more equal society and disbursing or distributing our resources equitably.
In the meantime, how much progress have you made with the education forum and conversation and the dialogues around it?
Oh, tomorrow we are having the final validation session at the UPSA. After going around the country, we've mobilized all opinions, synthesized them. After digesting, we are presenting the proposals that we have harvested across the country to the stakeholders for their validation. And this is the place at the UPSA tomorrow morning. After that, we will start putting together our report for submission to His Excellency the President.
And how much of our current education structure will you say you will touch?
Our mandate is not to touch per se structures. Our mandate is to mobilize opinions, and then on the basis of these opinions, provide an expert advice. So we have finished mobilizing opinions. It is based on the mobilized opinions that we are about to provide our expert advice on, and submit both to the government. So at this point, I am unable to put the cart before the horse.
We'll be looking forward to that, and thank you very much. Always educative speaking to you.
Pleasure is mine.
Mr. Kofi Asare is Executive Director. EduWatch has been doing